Welcome to live one of the Global Greek Influence podcast pre-launch. For those who have not heard of my podcast before, I started in December 2019 exclusively on Spotify and discussed global Greek influence on a research, entrepreneurship, innovation level with top Greek guests who have an international career. I have seasoned the past seasons with topical geopolitics and historic issues and current political matters. Season 7, which starts on the 1st of September this year on Spotify and here in this particular channel on YouTube on the same date, will be focused on geopolitics with exclusive top guests in global trends, regional and global politics who read behind the headlines and beyond current news. It is quite different to listen to the same person on a news panel comment on current news and events, and quite different to be led to dig into what to expect beyond current events through multiple factor lenses. And I wouldn't focus on anywhere else this season other than Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean. Unfortunately, most of the global news outlets, including the Greek ones and those of the diaspora, pay attention to the Middle East or Southeast Asia or East Europe, while the Eastern Mediterranean, apart from being home to Hellenism for millennia, is the crossroad of Asia, Africa, and Europe. Also, unfortunately, most diplomats and foreign affairs staff of the most prominent countries globally, whether in the West or the East, pay attention to where their key opponents are playing games and assume the Eastern Mediterranean and its countries will simply follow the aftermath of the events they treat as key ones. Why is that? Simply because they pay attention to those players who create a fuss, who think big and question the current status quo to shape the future one. So, as in life, sitting quietly and following trends does not really pay off, whether you have every right to consider yourself to be on the right side of history or not. And for Greece, it has always paid off when we stood at the forefront of events and took a stand to shape them. Greece is by default linked to the events in its immediate neighborhood. And it would have been suicidal not to connect with nations with the same outlook in the region. Those nations who seek peace, real collaboration, and set even and fair rules based not just on mutual understanding, but on international law, and not overrun them through a revisionist, imperial, 19th century totalitarian mindset and expectations, and their interpretation of international law or without international law at all. What Greece does in the Eastern Mediterranean already, what has been already doing, should be thousandfold in scale and rate, especially in regard to existing political formats and frameworks. For instance, the 3+1 of Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and the US, which is aimed at promoting stability, energy security, and economic cooperation in the Eastern Mediterranean, which integrates diplomatic, security, and infrastructure efforts among the allied democracies. The trilaterals of Greece, Cyprus, Egypt on defense and security, energy and infrastructure, diplomatic alignment, or the trilateral of Greece, Cyprus, and Jordan on regional stability, defense cooperation, energy, and economic integration. And this is exactly why we will look into these trilaterals and the 3+1 in this first live. Because if sitting quietly and simply following trends does not pay off, then the real question is whether Greece is using these existing political formats strongly enough to shape developments in its own immediate neighborhood before others shape them for us. These frameworks bring together countries that have common interests in regional stability, security, energy, infrastructure, and economic cooperation, And most importantly, countries that have every interest in defending a regional order based on the international law rather than allowing revisionist powers to dictate the terms of the future. So I want to look not just at what these formats say in summit declarations, but what they have actually produced, what has been institutionalized, what has been invested, what has been built, what security cooperation has become operational, what energy projects are moving ahead, and where we still mainly have MOUs, memoranda of understanding, and political language. Because if Greece wants to stand at the forefront of events in the Eastern Mediterranean rather than simply react to them, then these existing frameworks should not just survive, they should be multiplied in scale, speed, depth, and concrete outcomes. Starting with the Greece, Cyprus, Israel plus United States, the 3+1 format, which is the cooperation geometry that has achieved the strongest US-backed political and security institutionalization in the Eastern Mediterranean, while it is now finally developing a dedicated energy institution as well. Its political starting point was in March 2019 Jerusalem summit, when the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo joined the leaders of Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, followed by the Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act of 2019, which did not simply endorse the framework politically but embedded US participation in cooperation on energy, maritime security, cybersecurity, critical infrastructure protection, intelligence sharing, and military exercises. The Act also authorized concrete US security resources, international military education and training, the so-called IMET, military training funding for Greece of 1.3 million US dollars in fiscal year 2020, 1.5 million in FY 2021, and 1.8 million in the fiscal year 2022 for Cyprus, respectively. The investments were per year from 2,000 to 750,000 respectively, as well as up to 3 million in foreign military financing for Greece in fiscal year 2021. The framework, the 3+1, did not stop there. It expanded through interparliamentary mechanism, ministerial level cooperation, and working groups on energy, economic cooperation, climate, emergency preparedness, and counterterrorism. Of course, here I'm laying the background and all the work that has been done throughout the 3+1 framework. By 2022, the four countries were already preparing a roadmap with tangible deliverables, while the United States-Greek strategic dialogue statements in 2023 and 2024 continued to treat the 3+1 as a tool of regional integration and security. Now, the most important new concrete result came this June 2026, when the United States, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and Greece University signed the declaration establishing the Eastern Mediterranean Energy Center, or as called EMES, in Houston, Texas. This matters because the 2019 Act had originally authorized the concept, while this year the four sides actually moved to create the institution. Its work will cover natural gas development, US LNG infrastructure, energy transport networks, grid reliability, critical infrastructure resilience, emerging technologies, scientific research, workforce development, and private industry partnerships. Yet again, there is no verified public capital figure for EMEC itself, so I would not attach a made-up investment number to it, because I couldn't find one. When it comes to infrastructure, the flagship electricity project associated with Greece, Cyprus, Israel is the Great Sea Interconnector, the so-called GSI, which is formerly known as the Euro-Asia Interconnector, which is intended eventually to connect Israel, Cyprus, and Greece, and therefore connect Cyprus and Israel with the European electricity system. So the GSI is not has not emerged as a project through the 3+1, but it is a purely European Union project, which has awarded 657 million euros through the Connecting Europe facility for Greece-Cyprus section, which was the largest award in that particular Connecting Europe facility CF energy round. But this distinction is important. This investment, again, is not a 3+1 funding or US funding, and the cable, the Great Sea Interconnector, is not yet fully operational across Greece, Israel, and Cyprus. The three regional governments did, however, reaffirm their commitment to advancing it in December 2025, along with renewed 3+1 energy cooperation with Washington, and of course the recent deal that the Greek government has made in order to proceed with the GSI project. We could go, of course, further into the details of any diplomatic weaknesses such projects indicate for European Union itself, but this might be a topic for another live event. So in regard to the 3+1, which I have been discussing so far, there is still no credible official aggregate saying that the 3+1 itself has generated an X billion US dollars in investment. Now, if we look to another official trilateral in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is between Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt, this trilateral regards a geometry that has produced some of the most concrete operational defense cooperation and some of the most mature energy integration in the Eastern Mediterranean. One of the most significant infrastructure projects emerging from this trilateral is the Greece-Egypt or GRECI electricity interconnector, which is a planned subsea electricity bridge from Egypt to Greece and from there into the wider European electricity market. So one can understand that, again, we talk about a European Union project which is planned to have a capacity of approximately 3,000 megawatts or 3 gigawatts, carrying renewable electricity generated in Egypt to Greece, which seems to be part of the overall EU climate transition plan of the European Union to import renewable energy from North Africa to Europe. This particular project, the GRECI cable, received EU project of mutual interest, a PMI status, placing it within the EU strategic cross-border energy framework. In regard to financial terms of the Greece-Egypt cable, there is a current estimate of approximately 4.2 billion euros compared with an earlier estimate of 3,500 approximately billion of 3.5 billion euros. So these numbers, these figures have been reassessed in regards to the GRECI project. And such a revision of investment figures is important because the project has moved beyond being just another political declaration. Last April, for instance, the project company signed a grant agreement. The project company is ELICA, and this agreement regarded financing initial technical studies, while EBRD confirmed its support for studies of the 3 gigawatts interconnector. But again, figures have to be used correctly. The 4.2 billion euros is the projected total project budget, not the budget that has already been invested. And GRECI is not yet an operating electricity cable. And such distinctions are really important to be made when discussing Eastern Mediterranean infrastructure because projected capital expenditure, secured financing, studies, construction, and actual operation are completely different stages. And the last trilateral I would like us to go through very briefly is the one between Greece, Jordan, and Cyprus. A trilateral that requires more restraint because a lot of commentary oversells it. The mechanisms in this trilateral are real and permanent, with a permanent secretariat in Nicosia. We have regular summits, high-level foreign, defense, and security consultations, and signed cooperation frameworks, which cover investment, education, water, renewables, civil protection, and other sectors. This trilateral has also created continuity in political coordination, counterterrorism dialogue, regional diplomacy, and cooperation between investment agencies rather than functioning as a one-off diplomatic format. But when we look again at what has actually materialized in capital-intensive terms, its tangible economic and energy output remains modest. There is no verified major trilateral electricity interconnector, for instance, as in the case of between Greece, Israel, and Cyprus, or Greece and Egypt, or energy plant or large jointly financed FDI projects, compared to Kronos and Damietta or the Great Sea Interconnector. The strongest achievement of the Greece, Jordan, and Cyprus trilateral are institutional coordination, counterterrorism, regional diplomacy, sectoral MOUs, investment promotional mechanisms, water cooperation, and civil protection links. So there are no actual large-scale capital deployments so far, which is a serious and useful regional. So even though this is a serious regional framework, still at this stage we can see that it's far more coordination heavy and agreement heavy than infrastructure heavy or investment heavy. So where should all these cooperation geometries go from here? Looking at what the Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and United States, the 3+1, the Greece, Cyprus, Egypt trilateral, and the Greece, Cyprus, Jordan trilateral have actually achieved, tells us something important. Greece does not need to invent its Eastern Mediterranean strategy from zero. The political formats are already there. The relationships are already there. In several cases, the institutional structures are already there. What is missing is scale, speed, continuity, and transformation of political cooperation into economic, technological, energy, security, and infrastructure realities that become increasingly difficult to reverse. Now, because having 10 summits, for instance, in any of these trilaterals, does not necessarily mean having 10 outcomes or signing MOUs or creating economic integration, and calling countries strategic partners does not automatically create a strategic region. If Greece wants what it does in the Mediterranean to become thousandfold in scale and rate, as already been mentioned at the very beginning of this live, then the next phase has to be about moving from political geometries to geo-economic geometries, real cables, real energy routes, real ports, real LNG infrastructure, real data connections, real shipping, real logistics, real defense industries, real technology, research centers, investment vehicles, civil protection mechanisms, universities, and companies. In other words, Greece should not simply participate in the architecture of the Eastern Mediterranean. It should increasingly become one of the countries designing that architecture in the Eastern Mediterranean, starting with the Greece, Cyprus, Israel, plus United States, which has something extremely valuable that the other formats do not have at the same level, the direct institutional involvement of the United States. But if this framework is going to reach its full potential, Washington's involvement cannot remain concentrated mainly on diplomatic statements, strategic dialogue, and security cooperation. Greece should push for the 3+1 to become a permanent economic, energy, technology, and security platform with measurable targets attached to it. The creation of the Eastern Mediterranean Energy Center this year gives exactly this opportunity. Greece should not treat the IMEC as another institution that organizes conferences and produces reports. It should push for the center to become a pipeline between American capital and technology and Eastern Mediterranean projects. And I mean this literally. There should be an investment and project portfolio attached to the 3+1, updated every year, identifying projects in electricity interconnection, LNG, renewable energy, energy storage, hydrogen, where commercially viable, cybersecurity, subsea infrastructure, ports, artificial intelligence, maritime technology, critical mineral supply chains, water technologies, and critical infrastructure protection. Every project should have a development stage, estimated capital requirement, regulatory obstacles that need to be addressed, participating companies, and a timetable. Instead of saying that the 3+1 supports investment, tell investors where the projects are. Instead of saying that the 3+1 supports energy security, identify which infrastructure should be financed. Instead of saying that the 3+1 protects critical infrastructure, create the mechanisms that actually protect the electricity cables, pipelines, LNG infrastructure, ports, telecommunications, networks, and subsea data cables, upon which the region increasingly depends. The Great Sea Interconnector should therefore be treated not simply as another electricity project, but as part of a much wider Eastern Mediterranean infrastructure network, a region in which Israel and Cyprus become electrically connected with Greece, and therefore continental Europe is strategically different from a region in which each country remains an energy island. And Greece should aim much further than electricity. We are talking about one of the world's most important maritime spaces. Greece has one of the world's most important shipping communities. Israel has an extraordinary technology ecosystem. Cyprus has important position in shipping, also technologically, professional services, and regional business. The United States brings capital, technology, defense capabilities, energy companies, and geopolitical weight. So the 3+1 should become more flexible and self-independent while remaining interconnected to the Eastern Mediterranean, Middle East, and Europe. So why should the 3+1 not have a dedicated maritime technology and shipping pillar? Why should Greek shipping, Israeli technology, Cypriot maritime services, and American capital not be systematically connected through this framework? Why should there not be annual 3+1 investment forums rotating between Athens, Nicosia, Jerusalem, and major US economic centers, not simply attended by ministers and ambassadors, but by infrastructure funds, energy companies, ship owners, defense companies, technology firms, universities, and institutional investors? And when it comes to security, the next stage should be equally practical. The Eastern Mediterranean contains an increasing number of extremely expensive and strategically important offshore and subsea assets. Energy infrastructure without security infrastructure is incomplete infrastructure. Greece should therefore push for deeper coordination on maritime domain awareness, cybersecurity, protection of subsea infrastructure and counter-drone systems, search and rescue, emergency response, and intelligence sharing. The 3+1 does not need to become a NATO-style alliance. That is neither necessary nor what the mechanism was created to do, but it can become something extremely useful, a permanent Eastern Mediterranean strategic coordination platform, connecting security with the infrastructure and economic interests that security is supposed to protect. And Greece should be one of the countries constantly putting projects on that table rather than waiting for projects to arrive on the table. The Greece-Cyprus-Egypt trilateral should become the infrastructure powerhouse of these geometries. If the 3+1 has the strongest American institutional dimension, the Greece-Cyprus-Egypt trilateral has perhaps the clearest opportunity to become the infrastructure and energy backbone connecting Europe with the Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, and why not embedding in this trilateral a +1 like Israel. So here in this trilateral, Greece should think big. The 3 gigawatts Greek electricity interconnector, which has a projected 4.2 billion euros budget, is exactly the scale we should be discussing, not because the project is already completed, which is not, but because this is the type of project that physically changes the economic geography of a region. If Egyptian renewable electricity can eventually reach Greece and from Greece move further into European markets, Greece does not simply become an electricity importer, but it strengthens its position as an energy entrance into Europe. And that should be multiplied. The Greece-Cyprus-Egypt relationship should develop an integrated infrastructure strategy covering electricity, natural gas, LNG, renewables, ports, shipping, logistics, digital infrastructure, and eventually additional connections between North Africa and Europe. Egypt already has major gas infrastructure. Cyprus has offshore gas resources. Greece has geographic access to the Southeast Europe, infrastructure connecting it further into European markets, and an extraordinary shipping sector. These are not competing advantages, but complementary advantages. And that is exactly what successful regional integration is built on. The Kronos Egypt route demonstrates this logic. Instead of waiting for every country to construct completely separate infrastructure, existing Egyptian facilities can help commercialize Eastern Mediterranean gas. The same logic should be applied elsewhere. Use what already exists, connect what is currently disconnected, build new infrastructure where the economics justify it. Greece should also push the trilateral much further into ports and logistics, and I would say to further integrate all three major trilaterals it is currently involved. The relationship between Egyptian ports, Greek ports, and Cypriot maritime infrastructure should not remain an abstract discussion about connectivity. There should be identified shipping and logistics corridors, port to port cooperation, private sector investment programs, and digital systems which will allow goods to move faster and cheaper between North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, Southeast Europe, and the rest of the European Union. And this is particularly important because geography alone gives nobody a permanent strategic advantage. Infrastructure makes geography useful. The defense relationship should develop in parallel. Medusa has already demonstrated that Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt can move beyond declarations and exercises together operationally. And that experience should now increasingly connect with the protection of economic architecture being developed around it, especially in regard to energy installations, electricity cables, ports, commercial shipping, offshore platforms, and other critical maritime infrastructure. There is also a major industrial opportunity here. Greece should push for the trilateral to include a much stronger defense industry and dual-use technology component. Joint exercises, joint exercises are important, but joint industrial interests create another level of permanence. Maintenance, shipbuilding, surveillance technologies, maritime systems are areas where government cooperation can deliberately create opportunities for companies from all three countries. And universities should be brought into this much more aggressively as well. If Egypt, Cyprus, and Greece intend to build electricity networks, renewable energy systems, offshore gas projects, water infrastructure, even which is of great interest also within the trilateral of Greece, Cyprus, and Jordan, and advanced maritime systems, then they also need the engineers, researchers, and specialists who will operate them. Regional strategy is therefore not only about presidents, prime ministers, and foreign ministers. It is about engineers, companies, researchers, and investors, ports, cables, and ships. The Greece Cyprus Jordan trilateral needs to move from MOUs to projects at last. And this is where I would be more demanding. Mechanisms between these countries is politically viable and strategically sensible, but if we want to speak seriously about expanding Greek influence in the Eastern Mediterranean, this trilateral needs an economic second life. Even though MOUs, declarations, summits are useful, but at some point somebody has to ask, where are the projects? Where are we heading? Where is this going? Jordan offers Greece and Cyprus something extremely important, a stable political relationship with a country positioned between the Eastern Mediterranean and the Arab Middle East, with enormous relevance to regional security. But the economic relationships should begin matching the political importance of that geography. The most obvious place to start is water. The three countries already have a framework for water cooperation, and for Jordan, water is number one. I know that from their research interest and their universities' collaboration with global leading European universities in water research. So the next steps should be turning that framework into actual projects involving desalination technologies, wastewater treatment, irrigation, water loss reduction, smart water networks, renewable power desalination, and research cooperation, even in the cases of blue and green hydrogen. Greece and Cyprus are countries that understand water scarcity, island water management, drought, and the increasing pressure created by climate change. So these trilateral water mechanisms should therefore have projects, companies, financing requirements, and deadlines, not simply meetings. And the same applies to renewable energy. Instead of speaking generally about cooperation in renewables, the three governments should identify where Greek and Cypriot companies, European financing, and Jordanian projects can actually meet. Solar energy, storage, grid technologies, and water energy projects offer much more concrete ground for cooperation than broad statements. And we should not forget hydrogen, the hydrogen case for Jordan. And then there is logistics. Jordan should be connected much more meaningfully with Greek and Cypriot commercial networks. That means looking seriously at ports, shipping routes, logistics centers, supply chains, and the movement of goods between Jordan, the Eastern Mediterranean, and European markets. And Greece should use also its position inside the European Union much more strategically. One of Greece's greatest assets in dealing with countries such as Jordan is not only its bilateral relationship, it is the fact that Greece sits inside the decision making architecture of the European Union. And that should be translated into projects where European financing mechanisms can support water, energy, transport, or environmental projects involving Jordan and the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece, and Cyprus. We all three, along with the European Union, should actively help design those projects rather than simply politically supporting closer EU-Jordan relations. This is how diplomatic capital becomes economic capital. And I would add one more field, civil protection, even though it's not really my field. But wildfires, earthquakes, extreme heat, floods, and other natural disasters increasingly affect the entire Eastern Mediterranean. Greece, Cyprus, and Jordan should develop shared capabilities in aerial firefighting, emergency coordination, training, disaster management technologies, and rapid deployment. So the Eastern Mediterranean should not really rediscover cooperation every time there is a disaster. It should already have the mechanisms waiting. And then there is Lebanon, with which neither Greece or Cyprus really have a trilateral. But if we are serious about building an Eastern Mediterranean architecture rather than a collection of separate bilateral, trilateral friendships, Lebanon cannot remain outside our thinking. And I do not mean adding Lebanon to another photograph of leaders issuing another declaration and signing another MOU that nobody hears about again. I mean meaningful economic and institutional engagement. Lebanon's geography alone makes the country impossible to ignore in any serious Eastern Mediterranean strategy. Lebanon sits directly on the maritime space connecting Cyprus and the Levant, while its stability matters far beyond its own borders. Greece and Cyprus should therefore think about a structured cooperation format with Lebanon built around areas where tangible outcomes can actually be delivered. The first should be energy and electricity, rather than beginning with grand projects that require years of political negotiations and billions of financing. Corporations should begin with areas capable of producing visible results, like as in grid expertise, renewable energy deployment, energy storage, technical assistance, energy efficiency projects, and electricity system modernization. So, Greek and Cypriot companies and institutions should be encouraged to participate where projects are commercially and politically viable in Lebanon. Also, ports and shipping. Lebanon is a Mediterranean country. Greece is a global shipping power. Cyprus is a major regional maritime services center. There is an obvious basis for much deeper cooperation in port management, maritime services, shipping, education, logistics, digitalization of ports and maritime safety. This should not simply be government to government, but we should bring in the private sector, bring in Greek ship owners, bring in port operators, bring in technology companies, bring in universities, bring in European financial institutions where projects qualify. So, if cooperation depends entirely on foreign ministries, it will remain foreign policy. If companies begin investing and universities begin training people and infrastructure begins connecting markets, it becomes a relationship with roots. Thirdly, and finally, Greece and Cyprus should push for cooperation with Lebanon in civil protection and emergency response, similarly as with Jordan. Firefighting, search and rescue, maritime emergencies, earthquake, medical emergencies, and disaster logistics are areas where practical cooperation can create both immediate benefits and long term trust. And of course, I should not forget educational and human capital. Greece should think much more strategically about scholarships, joint degrees, university partnerships, maritime education, engineering, energy studies, archaeology, medicine, technology, involving Lebanese students and institutions. Influence is not created only through infrastructure, it is also created through generations of people who study together, build companies together, and develop professional networks together. And fifth, Lebanon should eventually be connected to the wider economic architecture of the trilaterals wherever politically and commercially possible. Not necessarily by immediately creating another formal trilateral or quadrilateral mechanism, but with projects. We should stop thinking only in terms of MOUs, diplomats, foreign ministries. We should start thinking on on a project basis. Just to cut short a little bit, if I went into too much detail in this first live, I would like to wrap up and say that Greece and Greek companies really need to seriously think about energy routes that connect through Greek infrastructure. And we also need to think on how many governments coordinate with Athens, how many universities cooperate with Greek institutions, and how difficult it would become for the region to operate without those connections. And this is our influence gap. This is where we should start looking into and invest. Greece needs an Eastern Mediterranean strategy measured in outcomes. And this brings me to the wider point. Greece has something that is sometimes underestimated, an extraordinary combination of geography, European Union membership, NATO membership, global shipping power, diplomatic credibility across different parts of the region, energy infrastructure, a large global diaspora, and historical relationships stretching across the Eastern Mediterranean for millennia. But advantages that are not used are simply potential. The countries that shape regions are not necessarily the largest countries, they are often the countries that become indispensable connectors. Greece should aim to become indispensable to the connection between Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, Europe and North Africa, the Balkans and the Levant,